The summer heat of Savannah pressed down like a suffocating blanket in August 1847. The air hung thick with humidity, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms mixed with the underlying rot of the marshlands. On Bull Street, Dr. Cornelius Whitmore's residence stood as a testament to both prosperity and peculiarity. The three-story mansion housed both his family quarters and his medical practice. But it was the basement, converted into what he called his anatomical parlor, that drew whispers among the household staff. 23-year-old Samuel, born enslaved on the Whitmore plantation, worked as the doctor's assistant. His keen intelligence had caught Dr. Whitmore's attention years ago, prompting the doctor to teach him to read medical texts and assist with procedures. Samuel moved through the grand house with quiet efficiency, his dark eyes observing everything, missing nothing. He had learned long ago that survival depended on seeing what others preferred to ignore. On this morning, Samuel descended the narrow stairs to the basement, carrying fresh linens and specialized wax preparations. The temperature dropped noticeably as he reached the lower level. The anatomical parlor stretched before him, a chamber filled with glass cabinets of gleaming instruments and shelves holding specimen jars. But it was the figures that dominated the space, standing throughout the room like guests frozen at an eternal ball. They appeared almost alive at first glance. The wax had been tinted to perfectly match human flesh, with every vein and muscle fiber visible beneath the translucent surface. Some were complete anatomical models, stripped of skin to reveal intricate networks beneath. Others showed cross-sections of organs or the delicate architecture of the human hand. Dr. Whitmore's work was renowned from Charleston to Richmond. Physicians traveled to Savannah specifically to view his collection, marveling at the accuracy and artistry. Samuel began his morning routine, checking each figure for deterioration, adjusting the lighting. He had performed these tasks hundreds of times, yet something felt different today. A coldness that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature settled into his bones. Dr. Whitmore descended at 8 o'clock precisely. He was a tall man in his late 40s, silver threading through his dark hair, hands steady despite his age. His reputation as a surgeon was impeccable. He had trained in Edinburgh and Paris before returning to establish his Savannah practice. "Good morning, Samuel." The doctor moved to examine his latest figure, a stunning representation of the human heart. "This piece is nearly complete. I believe it may be my finest work yet." Samuel studied the heart, noting the extraordinary detail. "Yes, sir. It's remarkable. The color is particularly lifelike." Dr. Whitmore smiled. "The secret is in the multiple layers of pigmented wax, applied at precisely the right temperature. This will serve as an invaluable teaching tool. They can study cardiac anatomy without the unpleasantness of cadaver dissection." Throughout the morning, Samuel assisted as the doctor received visitors. Neither seemed to notice Samuel beyond acknowledging his presence to hand them instruments. He had become part of the background, invisible as the furniture. After the visitors departed, Dr. Whitmore turned to Samuel with an expression that made the younger man's stomach tighten. "We have a new patient arriving this evening, a young woman from one of the merchant families. The surgery will be delicate, and I will need your full assistance." "Of course, sir." "Will Mrs. Whitmore be in attendance?" "No, she has departed for Charleston. She will be away for several weeks." "Doctor." Whitmore's eyes met Samuel's, and something flickered in their depths. "This surgery must be conducted with absolute discretion. The family wishes to avoid scandal. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, I understand." But Samuel did not understand, not fully, not yet. That understanding would come later, when the truth could no longer be hidden. The patient arrived after sunset, through the back entrance. Samuel helped her down to the basement, noting her pale face and frightened green eyes that widened at the sight of the wax figures. She could not have been more than 18. Dr. Whitmore greeted her reassuringly. "Miss Catherine, you are very brave. I assure you I have performed this surgery many times. Please lie here on the table." Samuel prepared the chloroform. He had assisted with enough operations to know the proper dosage, but as he measured the liquid, Dr. Whitmore placed a hand on his arm. A bit more than usual. She must remain completely still. "Sir, that amount might be dangerous," Samuel ventured quietly. Dr. Whitmore's grip tightened. "I'm aware of the dosage. Proceed as I have instructed." The surgery that followed would haunt Samuel's dreams for the rest of his life. Miss Catherine went under quickly, her breathing slow and shallow. Dr. Whitmore worked with his usual precision, but Samuel began to notice inconsistencies. The tumor seemed smaller than described, hardly life-threatening. And there were other incisions, ones that served no medical purpose, as if the doctor were studying her internal anatomy rather than treating an illness. When Samuel questioned one of these actions, Dr. Whitmore's response was sharp. "You are here to assist, not to question." Hours passed. Samuel's arms ached from holding instruments. Miss Catherine's breathing grew labored, her pulse weak. Finally, Dr. Whitmore stepped back. "That will suffice. Begin the closure." But as Samuel prepared the sutures, he noticed that Miss Catherine's chest had stopped rising. "Sir, I believe she has stopped breathing." Dr. Whitmore checked her pulse, showing no surprise. "So she has. A tragic outcome, but not unexpected given the advanced state of her illness." He pulled the sheet over her face. "We must inform the family. They will want to make arrangements." Samuel stared at the covered form, his mind racing. The surgery had taken hours, far longer than necessary. The doctor had made incisions unrelated to removing a tumor. The chloroform had been excessive from the start, as if the outcome had been predetermined. "We will need to prepare the body." Dr. Whitmore began cleaning his instruments. "I will write the death certificate. Heart failure during surgery is common enough. No one will question it." As the doctor ascended the stairs, Samuel remained alone with the body. The wax figures surrounding him seemed to watch with frozen gazes. How many of these figures had started as living patients? How many had died on this same table? Samuel pulled back the sheet, examining Miss Catherine's body with clinical eyes. The incisions were too numerous, too exploratory. This had not been a surgery to save a life. It had been something else entirely. Dr. Whitmore was not simply creating anatomical models from legitimately obtained cadavers. He was creating his own subjects, manufacturing death under the guise of treatment. And Samuel, through his assistants, had become complicit in murder. The magnolia-scented air drifting through the window seemed to carry the weight of all the suffering this house had witnessed. Samuel thought of his mother, sold away when he was 12. He thought of his sister, who had died from fever because no doctor would treat the enslaved with proper care. He thought of the hundreds who had lived and died without choice, their bodies used and discarded. But Miss Catherine had not been enslaved. She had been a wealthy merchant's daughter, with every privilege her status should provide. Yet she had died here at the hands of a celebrated physician. If someone like her could be murdered with impunity, what hope existed for people like Samuel? The question burned as he began preparing the body. But alongside fear and horror, something else grew. A determination born from years of silent observation, of seeing injustice and being powerless to prevent it. He could not bring Miss Catherine back, but perhaps he could ensure Dr. Whitmore's crimes did not continue. Over the following days, Samuel began keeping careful notes, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He recorded patient names, conditions, and outcomes. He noted the correlation between successful wax figures and recent patient deaths, but gathering evidence was only the beginning. Who would believe him? Who would risk their reputation to investigate a respected doctor based on accusations from someone legally classified as property? 3 nights after Miss Catherine's death, Samuel descended to the basement again, unable to sleep. He moved among the wax figures, studying them with new eyes, each piece potentially evidence of a life cut short. He stopped before the newest figure, The human heart Dr. Whitmore had been perfecting. The detail was extraordinary, beyond anything achievable from standard cadaver dissection. The color, texture, and precise relationships spoke to the doctor, having worked with fresh tissue, examined at the moment of death. A sound from upstairs froze him, footsteps moving toward the stairs. Samuel quickly extinguished his lamp and pressed into the shadows. The basement door opened, and Dr. Whitmore descended with his own lamp. The doctor walked to his latest creation, standing before it with rapt expression. Then he spoke, though no one was meant to hear. "You understand, don't you? The pursuit of knowledge requires sacrifice. These fools who call themselves physicians content themselves with textbook illustrations. They will never achieve true mastery. But I have found the way. Fresh tissue, examined in the moment of death, reveals secrets textbooks cannot teach." He continued, justifying his actions with rationalization of scientific progress. Samuel listened from his hiding place, body rigid. He heard the doctor's footsteps eventually retreat upstairs. Only then did Samuel allow himself to breathe fully. As he lay on his cot later, staring at the ceiling, he knew his decision had been made. He could not continue assisting in these murders, regardless of consequences, but he also could not simply run. Others would die if Dr. Whitmore continued. The problem of freedom weighed heavily. He was not free to leave, to speak openly, to seek justice. Yet the wealthy patients who died were not truly free either, trapped by their trust in authority, in reputation, in social structures that said men like Dr. Whitmore could not be monsters. True freedom, Samuel realized, was not simply the absence of chains. It was the power to choose, to act, to defend oneself and others. And that freedom had to be seized, carved out with whatever tools were available, regardless of personal cost. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Miss Abigail Winters arrived requesting to speak with the doctor about her sister's case. Samuel recognized her from Miss Catherine's funeral, where her grief had been profound. Now she stood in the entry hall, black mourning dress stark against cream walls, determination barely masking anguish. Dr. Whitmore received her in his study. The walls were thin, and Samuel positioned himself near the door, ostensibly organizing supplies, and listened. "Dr. Whitmore, I must speak frankly." Miss Winter's voice trembled but remained firm. "My sister died under your care. You assured us the surgery was routine, that she would recover, yet she never woke. I have been speaking with other families. There have been 3 other young patients who died in your care in the past 6 months. All underwent surgeries you deemed necessary. All were previously healthy. The doctor's response was smooth, practiced. Miss Winters, I understand your grief, but you must comprehend the risks inherent in surgery. Your sister's tumor had begun infiltrating surrounding organs. The surgery was her only chance. I have spoken with Dr. Morrison in Charleston." Miss Winters countered. "He reviewed Catherine's symptoms. He told me her condition did not require immediate surgical intervention, that she could have been monitored and treated conservatively. Why did you not suggest this approach?" Silence stretched uncomfortably. "Dr. Morrison is competent but somewhat old-fashioned in his methods. I am trained in the latest European techniques. I made the decision I believed would give your sister the best outcome. I want to see your medical records for Catherine's case." Miss Winter's words came out hard, demanding. "That is quite impossible." Dr. Whitmore's voice cooled. "Medical records are confidential. Your sister signed consent, and I performed it to the best of my abilities. I must ask you to leave. Your accusations are both unfounded and slanderous." Samuel heard rustling as Miss Winters stood. "I will not leave this alone. If you will not provide answers, I will seek them elsewhere. There are people in this city who will listen." The door opened suddenly, and Miss Winters emerged, face flushed with anger and grief. She swept past Samuel, but at the top of the stairs she paused, turning to look directly at him. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps. After she left, Dr. Whitmore called Samuel into the study. The doctor stood by the window, tension in his shoulders despite his relaxed posture. That woman is becoming a nuisance. Her grief has made her irrational. She seemed quite rational to me, sir, Samuel responded carefully. The doctor turned, fixing him with a sharp look. Did you hear our conversation? Only fragments, sir. Dr. Whitmore studied him. Good. What passes in this house is private. You would do well to remember that, particularly if anyone should question you. The implicit threat hung between them. I understand, sir. That evening, after Dr. Whitmore retired, Samuel heard a light tap at the back door. Opening it, he found Ezekiel, a free black man who worked as a porter at the City Exchange. Brother Samuel, I have a message. The Quaker woman, Mrs. Hartwell, wishes to speak with you. There's a gathering tomorrow night at the warehouse on Factor's Walk. Samuel felt his heart quicken. Mrs. Hartwell was known among Savannah's black community as someone who could be trusted, who quietly assisted people seeking freedom. Tell her I will come. The next evening, Samuel slipped out through the back gate after ensuring Dr. Whitmore was settled. He made his way through familiar alleys, using skills developed over years of moving unseen. The warehouse stood near the end of Factor's Walk, storing cotton before it was loaded onto ships. Inside, lamplight illuminated a circle of faces, perhaps 20 people on crates and cotton bales. Mrs. Hartwell, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, greeted him warmly. Samuel, thank thee for coming. We have much to discuss. The meeting began with reports from various individuals sharing news of families separated by sale, of beatings, of masters who violated humanity. Mrs. Hartwell listened with compassionate attention. When Samuel's turn came, he hesitated. What he knew was dangerous, potentially exposing everyone to retaliation. Yet the weight of his knowledge had become unbearable. I work for Dr. Whitmore. Many know him as a respected physician, but terrible things are happening in his house. He paused, gathering courage. He is killing his patients, not through incompetence, but deliberately. He uses surgeries to study anatomy, to create wax figures, and he does it regardless of whether the patient could have been saved. The silence was absolute. Mrs. Hartwell leaned forward. Thee must be very certain of such an accusation. The consequences of being wrong are severe. I am certain. I have kept records, names, dates, surgical details. And there is a woman, a sister of one of his victims, who is beginning to ask questions. If we could somehow connect her investigation with my evidence, perhaps something could be done. Mrs. Hartwell exchanged glances with other abolitionists present. This is extremely dangerous. Dr. Whitmore is one of Savannah's most prominent citizens. Yet we cannot allow this to continue, Mrs. Hartwell said firmly. If what Samuel says is true, and I believe it is, then this man is a monster operating under protection of his reputation. We must find a way to expose him. Discussion continued for over an hour. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell suggested a plan. She would contact Miss Winters through social channels, expressing condolences. If Miss Winters proved receptive, Mrs. Hartwell could gradually introduce the idea of deeper investigation. Meanwhile, Samuel would continue gathering evidence. But there was a more immediate problem. Dr. Whitmore had mentioned receiving a new patient, a young man from a planter family who suffered from seizures. The surgery was scheduled for 3 days hence. We must stop this surgery, Samuel said urgently. Mrs. Hartwell placed a hand on his arm. Thee cannot blame thyself for the doctor's evil, but thee is right that we must act quickly. As the meeting dispersed, Samuel felt both hope and terror. For the first time since Miss Catherine's death, there was a possibility of stopping Dr. Whitmore. But with that possibility came increased danger. Before sleep claimed him, Samuel prayed for the young man whose life hung in balance, for Miss Winters and Mrs. Hartwell, for himself, that he might survive what was coming. The magnolia-scented breeze drifted through his window. The entire system, Samuel reflected, was built on theft of freedom, exploitation of human beings treated as property. Dr. Whitmore's murders were merely an extension of that fundamental evil, but Samuel also knew that evil could only flourish when good people remained silent. He had been silent too long. Whatever the cost, he would be silent no longer. The next 2 days passed in excruciating tension. Samuel maintained his routine, but every moment felt charged with significance. He watched Dr. Whitmore prepare, noting the doctor's particular attention to waxworking materials, the way he sharpened instruments with almost loving care. On the second day, a message arrived. Samuel caught a glimpse of the doctor's face as he read. Dr. Whitmore's expression darkened, jaw tightening. He crumpled the letter before stalking to his study and slamming the door. Later, Samuel learned the young man scheduled for surgery had cancelled. The family sent regrets, explaining they had decided to seek a second opinion in Charleston. Dr. Whitmore received this news with barely contained fury. The plan had worked. One life had been saved, but the victory came at a cost. Dr. Whitmore now knew someone was interfering, poisoning his reputation. He would be more cautious now, more suspicious. That evening, Dr. Whitmore summoned Samuel. The doctor sat behind his desk, lamplight casting harsh shadows across his face. His usual composure had cracked, revealing something darker beneath. Someone has been spreading lies about me. That meddling Winters woman, no doubt. But I wonder if she has had assistance. His eyes fixed on Samuel. Tell me, have you been speaking with anyone about my practice? About my patients? No, sir, Samuel lied smoothly. I know my place, and I would never discuss your private medical matters. Dr. Whitmore studied him. See that you remember that. You have been afforded privileges most in your position could never dream of. But do not mistake my benevolence for weakness. If I discover betrayal, the consequences will be severe. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I understand completely. Good. The doctor's posture relaxed slightly. I have another matter. There is a patient arriving tomorrow, a woman from the islands suffering from chronic abdominal pain. She is of mixed heritage, educated in England, but has no family here. The surgery will be delicate, and I will require your absolute discretion. Samuel felt his blood run cold. A woman with no local family, no one to question her treatment. Dr. Whitmore was selecting victims more carefully now. Of course, sir. I will prepare the parlor. Samuel left with his mind racing. He had perhaps 24 hours to prevent another murder. Leaving the house again so soon would be too risky. Dr. Whitmore might have him followed or prevent him from leaving. The solution came unexpectedly. Late that evening, a knock at the back door. Samuel answered to find Ezekiel accompanied by a young white woman dressed as a servant. It took Samuel a moment to recognize Miss Winters, her auburn hair hidden beneath a plain cap. May we come in? It is urgent. Samuel quickly ushered them to a small storage room. Miss Winters removed her cap, expression determined despite obvious fear. Mrs. Hartwell told me of your evidence. I need to see your records. I need proof that what happened to my sister was not isolated, but part of a pattern. Samuel hesitated. Sharing his journal meant taking an irreversible step. But looking at Miss Winters' face, seeing the pain and determination, he made his choice. He retrieved the journal and returned. Miss Winters took it with trembling hands, scanning pages by candlelight. Her face grew paler with each entry, breathing shallow. Dear God, there are so many. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years, perhaps longer. Those are only cases I have direct knowledge of. There may be more. Miss Winters looked up, tears streaming. We trusted him. We brought our loved ones believing he would heal them, and instead... She could not finish. There is another patient coming tomorrow, Samuel said. A woman with no family here to protect her. Dr. Whitmore is being more careful in his selection. We must stop him before he kills again. Miss Winters wiped her eyes, steel returning. What do you need me to do? The plan they devised was audacious and terrifying. Miss Winters would contact authorities directly, using her social position to demand investigation, but evidence needed to be overwhelming, undeniable. They needed to catch Dr. Whitmore in the act, with witnesses present who could testify. Mrs. Hartwell would arrange for several prominent citizens to arrive during the surgery, ostensibly to view the anatomical collection. Mr. Foster, a lawyer with abolitionist sympathies, would be among them, as would Dr. Morrison from Charleston. If they could witness the doctor administering excessive anesthetic or performing unnecessary procedures, it might overcome his reputation. But the most dangerous role would fall to Samuel. He would need to delay the surgery, create a window for witnesses to arrive. And he would need to be prepared to testify against Dr. Whitmore, despite the danger such testimony would create. I understand the risk you are taking, Miss Winters said, gripping Samuel's hand. If this fails, you will face terrible retaliation. Mrs. Hartwell has arranged passage on a ship to Philadelphia if you need to flee. Samuel nodded slowly. The offer was generous, but it meant leaving behind everyone he knew. Yet staying would almost certainly mean death if their plan failed. After they departed, Samuel sat in darkness, contemplating what morning would bring. He thought about his mother, somewhere in the vast South. He thought about Catherine Winters and others who had died in the parlor. He thought about the patient arriving tomorrow. Sleep eluded him. Instead, Samuel spent the night in preparation, mentally reviewing every step, considering contingencies. He wrote a letter to be delivered to Mrs. Hartwell if he did not survive, containing additional details about Dr. Whitmore's methods. As dawn broke over Savannah, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Samuel descended to the anatomical parlor. The wax figures greeted him with eternal silence, illuminated by early morning light. How many hearts stopped beating to create these masterpieces, and how many more would cease if Dr. Whitmore was allowed to continue? Dr. Whitmore arrived precisely at 8. His mood seemed improved, anticipation of the upcoming surgery apparently having restored his equanimity. "Good morning, Samuel. Is everything prepared?" "Yes, sir. The instruments are ready." "Excellent. The patient should arrive within the hour. This will be a complex procedure. It will provide an excellent opportunity to study female reproductive anatomy in detail. The casual way Dr. Whitmore discussed turning a living woman into a subject for study made Samuel's stomach turn, but he kept his expression neutral. "Will you be inviting any observers, sir?" Dr. Whitmore looked up sharply. "No. As I mentioned, this patient values her privacy. There will be no observers." "Of course, sir." The patient arrived shortly thereafter through the back entrance. She was a striking woman in her early 30s, with skin the color of honey and intelligent dark eyes that surveyed the parlor with unease. Her name was Louisa, and she had been suffering from abdominal pain for 6 months. Dr. Whitmore examined her briefly. "The pain you describe suggests a serious internal condition. Surgery is necessary. We should proceed today, while you are already here." "Today?" Louisa's eyes widened. "But I had understood we would discuss treatment options first. I have seen cases like this before. Delay only worsens the condition. Better to address it now." He gestured around them. "As you can see, I am highly skilled. You are in excellent hands." Louisa looked uncertainly between them. "I suppose if you think it truly necessary." "I do." Dr. Whitmore was already moving to prepare. "Samuel will help you onto the table, and we will begin shortly." As Samuel assisted Louisa, he whispered urgently, "Help is coming. Try to delay. Ask questions, request time to pray, anything to buy a few more minutes." Louisa's eyes met his, confusion and fear mingling, but she gave the slightest nod. "Dr. Whitmore, before we begin, Might I have a few moments? I would like to say a prayer. Dr. Whitmore's jaw tightened with impatience, but he nodded curtly. Of course, but please be brief. Louisa closed her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Samuel busied himself with instruments, moving as slowly as he dared. Every minute was a minute closer to the arrival of Miss Winters and her witnesses, but Dr. Whitmore's patience was not infinite. After perhaps 5 minutes, he stepped forward. That is sufficient. Samuel, prepare the chloroform. As Samuel reached for the bottle, there was commotion from upstairs. Voices, multiple people speaking at once, footsteps on the floor above. Dr. Whitmore frowned, moving toward the stairs. What is the meaning of this? I specifically instructed that I was not to be disturbed. The basement door opened, and Miss Winters descended, followed by Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Foster, and Dr. Morrison. Behind them came 3 other men Samuel did not recognize, though their prosperous clothing marked them as members of Savannah's merchant class. Dr. Whitmore, Miss Winters said firmly, we have come to witness this surgery. These gentlemen have expressed interest in your techniques, and I have informed them of my concerns regarding your practice. You will proceed, but you will do so under observation. Dr. Whitmore's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. You have no right to intrude on my private practice. I will have you arrested for trespass. Mr. Foster stepped forward. Dr. Whitmore, we have obtained a warrant from Judge Hamilton, authorizing investigation into complaints regarding your surgical procedures. You are free to proceed with this surgery, but you will do so with witnesses present. Should you refuse, it will be noted in our report to the court. The doctor's hands clenched into fists. His gaze swept over the assembled group, finally landing on Samuel with understanding and fury. You arranged this betrayal. Before Samuel could respond, Dr. Morrison intervened. Dr. Whitmore, I have reviewed several of your recent cases, including Miss Catherine Winters. I have significant concerns about the appropriateness of your surgical interventions. These gentlemen share those concerns. We are here merely to observe. If your procedures are as skilled and necessary as you claim, you have nothing to fear from our presence. The standoff stretched for several long moments. Samuel could see Dr. Whitmore weighing his options, calculating whether he could somehow salvage the situation. On the table, Louisa had raised herself on her elbows, looking between the participants with wide eyes. Finally, Dr. Whitmore spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Very well. If you insist on observing, I will proceed, but I want it noted that this disruption, this violation of the doctor-patient relationship, is highly irregular. He turned back to the surgical table, but his movements were no longer smooth and assured. His hands trembled as he reached for his instruments. Samuel, he commanded, administer the anesthetic, the standard dosage. Samuel picked up the chloroform bottle, making a show of measuring carefully. Sir, what is the standard dosage? For the benefit of our observers, perhaps you could specify the amount. Dr. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You know perfectly well the proper dosage. Why do you ask? I want to ensure I follow your instructions precisely. Given that we have witnesses present, it seems important to be clear about every step. Dr. Morrison moved closer, observing the bottle and cloth Samuel held. What dosage do you typically employ, Dr. Whitmore? A sufficient amount to ensure complete unconsciousness. Too little, and the patient will wake during the procedure. Too much. He paused, seeming to realize the trap. Too much can, of course, be dangerous, which is why one must be precise. And in your previous surgeries, Samuel said quietly, his heart pounding, what dosages did you use? In Miss Catherine's surgery, for instance, you instructed me to use more than the standard amount. You said she needed to be completely still. The silence in the anatomical parlor was absolute. Every eye turned to Dr. Whitmore, whose face had gone from red to pale. You dare to question my medical judgment, you who have no formal training, no education. I dare to speak the truth." Samuel's voice was steady despite his fear. "You have been killing your patients, Dr. Whitmore, not through incompetence but deliberately. You use excessive anesthetic to ensure they do not wake. You perform unnecessary procedures to study their anatomy, and you create your beautiful wax figures from the bodies of those you have murdered." "Lies!" Dr. Whitmore shouted. "The paranoid delusions of an ignorant slave, nothing more." But Mr. Foster had already produced Samuel's journal. "I have here a detailed account of your surgeries over the past 2 years. Dates, patient names, descriptions of procedures, and records of outcomes. The correlation between successful additions to your wax collection and patient deaths is striking." Dr. Morrison had taken the journal and was flipping through its pages, his expression growing increasingly grave. "These notes describe procedures that have no therapeutic value: exploratory incisions, removal of healthy organs, extended surgery times that no patient could survive." One of the other observers, whom Samuel later learned was the city's mayor, stepped forward. "Is this true, Whitmore? Have you been using your position to harm those who came to you for healing?" Dr. Whitmore looked around wildly, seeing his reputation, his life's work, collapsing. "You do not understand. The advancement of medical knowledge requires sacrifice. Those patients were dying anyway. I merely used their deaths to further science, to create teaching tools that will benefit countless future physicians." "They were not dying," Miss Winters said, her voice breaking. "My sister was a healthy young woman with a minor ailment. She trusted you. We all trusted you." Dr. Whitmore's composure finally shattered. He lunged toward Samuel with a surgical scalpel, his face twisted with rage. "You have destroyed me. Everything I have built, my reputation, my work, all destroyed by an ungrateful slave who does not comprehend the greatness of what I was accomplishing." But Mr. Foster and one of the other men caught the doctor before he could reach Samuel. Wresting the scalpel from his grip, Dr. Whitmore collapsed to his knees, sobbing as reality penetrated his fury. The authorities were summoned. Dr. Whitmore was taken into custody, still protesting his innocence. The anatomical parlor was sealed, its contents to be examined as evidence, and Samuel, who had risked everything to expose the truth, found himself suddenly free, the judge having declared that his role in bringing a murderer to justice merited his emancipation. But freedom came with a bitter taste. As Samuel stood in the anatomical parlor one final time, surrounded by the wax figures representing so many lives cut short, he wondered if justice would truly be served. The trial of Dr. Cornelius Whitmore became the scandal that shook Savannah to its foundations. For 6 weeks in autumn 1847, the city's elite grappled with the horrifying revelation. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators from every social class. Samuel sat in the witness chair on the trial's 4th day, acutely aware that he was breaking every social convention by testifying against a white man in a Southern courtroom. But Judge Hamilton, a Massachusetts native, insisted that all relevant witnesses would be heard regardless of race. Mr. Washington, the prosecutor, addressed him by the surname Samuel had chosen upon emancipation. "Please describe for the jury what you observed during Miss Catherine Winters' surgery." Samuel took a deep breath. "Dr. Whitmore instructed me to administer approximately twice the standard chloroform dose. When I questioned this, he told me the patient needed to remain completely still. During the surgery, he made incisions that served no therapeutic purpose. He removed healthy tissue, studying them extensively. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours, far longer than necessary. Miss Catherine's breathing grew weaker throughout, but Dr. Whitmore did not seem concerned. When she finally stopped breathing, he showed no surprise, as if the outcome had been expected. The defense attorney, Mr. Calhoun, rose to cross-examine. "Mr. Washington, Is it not true that you have no formal medical training? That is true, sir. However, I observed Dr. Whitmore perform many surgeries over 2 years. I became familiar with his typical procedures. The surgery on Miss Catherine was markedly different from those where the patient survived. But you are not qualified to judge whether those differences were medically necessary. If that were true, sir, Samuel responded, then why did Dr. Whitmore confess in my hearing that he was using the surgeries to advance his anatomical studies? Why did he speak of the bodies as sources of fresh tissue rather than as patients he was trying to save? Mr. Calhoun's face reddened. You claim to have heard such a confession, but conveniently there were no other witnesses. Before Samuel could respond, Mr. Foster stood. The prosecution has additional witnesses, but I would remind my colleague that Mr. Washington is no longer enslaved. He is a free man, emancipated by judicial decree. His testimony deserves the same consideration as any free citizen's. The judge nodded. Sustained. Mr. Calhoun, please confine your questions to matters of fact. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Samuel's answers remained consistent and detailed. When he finally stepped down, he caught sight of Miss Winters in the gallery, her expression showing gratitude and grief. Over following days, other witnesses testified. Dr. Morrison provided expert analysis, explaining how the procedures deviated from standard practice. Mrs. Hartwell testified about the pattern of suspicious deaths. Several family members spoke tearfully about their loved ones' final days. The most damaging testimony came from Louisa. She described Dr. Whitmore's insistence on immediate surgery despite her minor symptoms. His resistance to giving her time to consider alternatives and his fury when witnesses arrived. I believed I was going to die on that table. If not for Mr. Washington's warning and Miss Winters's arrival, I would have become another figure in Dr. Whitmore's collection. Dr. Whitmore testified in his own defense. For a time, his refined manner and scientific explanations seemed to sway some jurors. He portrayed himself as a dedicated physician. The patients I treated were dying. Their conditions were terminal. I sought to ensure their deaths would serve a higher purpose, advancing medical science. Is that not more ethical than allowing them to die with no contribution to human knowledge? Mr. Washington rose for cross-examination. Dr. Whitmore, you testified that your patients were dying, but Miss Catherine Winters was evaluated by Dr. Morrison before coming to you, and he found no evidence of a terminal condition. Dr. Morrison's examination was superficial. I conducted a more thorough assessment and discovered the true extent of her illness. Yet Dr. Morrison has testified that Miss Catherine's tumor, examined post-mortem, was small and benign. There was no evidence of the extensive organ involvement you described. Dr. Whitmore hesitated. Medical conditions can evolve rapidly. Perhaps the disease progressed between examinations in a matter of days. Mr. Washington's tone was skeptical. Or perhaps the condition was never as serious as you claimed. Perhaps you deliberately misrepresented her illness to justify a surgery that was never medically necessary. The questioning continued, with Mr. Washington methodically dismantling Dr. Whitmore's claims. When the prosecutor introduced the wax figures as evidence, bringing them into the courtroom one by one, the jury's faces showed clear revulsion. Each figure was accompanied by documentation showing correlation between its creation and a patient's death. The defense's closing argument focused on Dr. Whitmore's contributions to medical science, the many lives he had saved, and the unreliability of biased witnesses. Mr. Calhoun painted Samuel as a disgruntled servant seeking revenge, and Miss Winters as a grief-stricken woman whose judgment had been clouded. But the prosecution's closing was devastating. Mr. Washington stood before the jury and gestured to the wax figures along the courtroom wall. Gentlemen of the jury, these are not merely anatomical models. They are monuments to murder. Each one represents a life cut short, a patient who came seeking healing and found only death. The defense would have you believe these deaths were unfortunate but necessary sacrifices for medical progress. But I ask you to consider the families left behind, the young lives destroyed, the trust violated. Is any advancement in science worth the deliberate murder of innocent people? Can we allow physicians to become executioners, hiding behind medical authority? The jury deliberated for 2 days. Samuel spent that time at the boarding house Mrs. Hartwell had arranged, unable to eat or sleep properly. If Dr. Whitmore was acquitted, Samuel knew his own life would be forfeit. When word came that the jury had reached a verdict, Samuel returned to the courthouse. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Miss Winters sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly. The jury foreman stood. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some spectators cheered while others shouted in outrage. Dr. Whitmore collapsed in his chair, face ashen. Judge Hamilton gavelled for order, and when silence was restored, he pronounced sentence. Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, you have been found guilty of the most heinous crime imaginable, the betrayal of the sacred trust between physician and patient. You used your position to murder those who came to you for healing. The evidence has revealed a pattern of deliberate killing spanning at least 2 years. While we cannot know the true extent of your crimes, we know enough to render judgment. The judge paused. The sentence for murder in the first degree is death by hanging. However, given your age and the unprecedented nature of these crimes, I am commuting your sentence to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. You will spend the remainder of your days in the state penitentiary, where you will have ample time to contemplate the evil you have wrought. Dr. Whitmore was led away in chains, still protesting his innocence. Samuel watched him go, feeling not triumph but deep exhaustion. Justice had been served, but it could not restore the lives lost. In the weeks that followed, Savannah struggled to make sense of what had occurred. The Whitmore residence was sold, its contents auctioned except for the anatomical parlor, which was dismantled and the wax figures destroyed. Some argued they should be preserved, but Miss Winters led a successful campaign to have them burned, insisting the victims deserved dignity in death. Samuel found himself in an unfamiliar position, free but uncertain what to do with that freedom. Mrs. Hartwell offered to help him relocate north, but Samuel hesitated. Leaving felt like abandoning those who remained enslaved. The decision was made when Dr. Morrison approached him one evening. "Mr. Washington, I have a proposition. I'm getting too old for the demands of my practice, and I need an assistant, someone intelligent, observant, with medical knowledge, someone I can trust. Would you be willing to come work with me in Charleston?" Samuel was taken aback. "You would hire me, sir, a black man, as your medical assistant?" Dr. Morrison smiled. "You are already more qualified than half the white assistants I have employed. And perhaps together we can work toward changing the medical profession, making it more accountable, ensuring that what happened with Whitmore never happens again." It was not the freedom Samuel had dreamed of as a child, but it was a beginning, a chance to use his knowledge for good rather than being complicit in evil. He accepted. Before leaving Savannah, Samuel visited Miss Winters one final time. She had aged in the months since the trial, but there was also new strength in her bearing. "Thank you," she said simply, "for having the courage to speak, for not allowing fear to silence you when silence would have been safer. I only wish I had spoken sooner. Perhaps if I had, your sister would still be alive." Miss Winters shook her head. "You did what you could, when you could. That is all any of us can do." She handed him a small, leather-bound book. "I have written down Catherine's story and the stories of the other victims. I'm having it published. I want you to have the first copy, so that they are remembered." Samuel took the book, running his fingers over the embossed cover. "What will you do now?" "I'm joining the abolitionist movement. This trial has opened my eyes to so many things I chose not to see before." Dr. Whitmore's crimes were possible because our society accepts certain people as less valuable than others. Because we have created a system where human beings can be owned and used and destroyed with minimal consequence. I cannot undo what happened to Catherine, but I can work to change the system that made Dr. Whitmore's evil possible. They parted as unlikely allies, bound together by shared trauma and commitment to preventing future horrors. Samuel traveled to Charleston and began his new life, working alongside Dr. Morrison. Word of his role in exposing Dr. Whitmore spread, and he found himself consulted by other physicians concerned about ethical practices. Years later, after the Civil War had torn the country apart and rebuilt it on new foundations, Samuel opened his own practice. He trained other black physicians, sharing not only medical knowledge, but also the hard lessons he had learned about power, trust, and the deadly consequences of unchecked authority. He never forgot the faces of those who had died in Dr. Whitmore's anatomical parlor, and he made it his life's work to ensure their deaths were not meaningless. The story of Dr. Whitmore became a cautionary tale in medical schools across the country, a reminder that scientific knowledge without ethical constraint is not progress, but perversion. The beautiful wax figures once celebrated as masterpieces were revealed as monuments to murder, their perfection achieved through deliberate destruction of human life. But perhaps the most important legacy was the recognition that freedom is not simply the absence of physical chains. True freedom requires the power to speak truth to authority, to stand against evil even when the cost is high, to choose dignity over safety. Samuel had been legally enslaved when he first began documenting Dr. Whitmore's crimes, but in that moment of decision, he had claimed a freedom more profound than any legal decree could provide. The magnolia-scented air of Savannah had witnessed unspeakable horrors in that basement on Bull Street. But it had also witnessed the courage of ordinary people who refused to look away, who chose to act despite their fear. In the end, that courage proved stronger than Dr. Whitmore's reputation, stronger than the social structures that protected him, stronger even than the silence that had allowed his crimes to continue. Justice had been served, though imperfectly. The dead could not be restored. The trauma could not be erased, but their stories had been told, their deaths acknowledged, and their killer held accountable. It was not enough, would never be enough, but it was something. And from that something, change had begun. As Samuel stood on the deck of the ship that would carry him to Charleston and his new life, he looked back at Savannah's skyline one final time. Somewhere in that city, people remained enslaved, their freedom still a distant dream. Somewhere, other abuses of power continued unchecked. But somewhere, too, Miss Winters and Mrs. Hartwell and others like them were working toward change, chipping away at the foundations of injustice, one action at a time. The work would continue long after Samuel was gone. The fight for freedom, for dignity, for recognition of every person's inherent worth would span generations. But it was a fight worth having, a cause worth serving. And if his testimony, his willingness to risk everything for truth, had contributed even slightly to that ongoing struggle, then perhaps the horrors he had witnessed and survived had some meaning after all. The ship began to move, carrying Samuel away from the sight of so much pain toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind him, the city receded into the distance, its secrets and sins, its beauty and brutality, all mingling in the humid air that would forever smell of magnolia and marsh. Ahead lay Charleston, work, purpose, and the slow, difficult task of building a life from the fragments of trauma. He faced that future with the same courage that had allowed him to stand in a courtroom and speak truth against power, the same determination that had made him choose action over silence. Freedom, Samuel had learned, was not a destination, but a journey. It was choosing to stand when staying silent would be safer. It was recognizing the humanity in all people, regardless of their status. It was using whatever power one possessed, however limited, to prevent harm and promote justice. And it was understanding that individual liberation meant nothing if it was not connected to collective liberation, that no one was truly free until everyone was free. The horror beneath Dr. Whitmore's parlor had been exposed and ended. But the larger horror, the fundamental injustice that made such evils possible, remained. The struggle to eradicate that injustice would require efforts of thousands over decades. Samuel was one person, with one story, but he carried with him the stories of those who had died, their memory demanding that the work continue, as the Georgia coast disappeared from view and the open ocean spread before him. Samuel felt the weight of all he carried, the trauma and responsibility, the grief and determination. But he also felt something unexpected: hope. Not naive hope that all would be well, but the harder, more resilient hope that comes from having faced evil and survived, from having spoken truth and been heard, from having chosen freedom even when the cost was high. That hope would sustain him through the years ahead, through the challenges of building a new life and the ongoing struggle for justice. It would be his inheritance to the next generation, a testament to the power of ordinary people to resist extraordinary evil. And it would be his tribute to those who had died in the anatomical parlor, a promise that their deaths had not been forgotten, that their stolen lives had purchased at terrible cost a measure of truth and justice that might prevent future horrors. The story of the doctor of Savannah, who preserved his patients in wax, would be remembered not for its horror alone, but for what that horror revealed about the human capacity for both cruelty and courage, for both evil and resistance. It would stand as a reminder that progress built on suffering is not progress at all, and that true freedom requires eternal vigilance against those who would exploit the vulnerable. Samuel Washington, born enslaved and freed through courage, would live another 40 years. He would train dozens of physicians, treat thousands of patients, and write extensively about medical ethics and accountability. But he would always remember those days in Savannah when he had stood at the intersection of horror and hope and chosen to speak rather than remain silent. That choice had defined not only his life, but also contributed to a broader movement toward justice and human dignity.